The Coastal Command of the British Royal Air Force, the service responsible for coastal protection and maritime shipping, from its very inception constantly felt the need for long-range seaplanes. They were to conduct long-range maritime reconnaissance, as well as escort convoys and protect them from the submarine threat. Even during the First World War, similar functions were performed by twin-engine Felixstowe flying boats. Over the next 15 years, the British adopted several more types of biplane seaplanes of similar purpose, the last of which was the short Singapore 3, which appeared in 1933. But all of them quickly became obsolete, and the Singapore was no exception. With the aim of replacing this aircraft with a more promising machine, the RAF Command prepared new operational requirements, which were soon specified in a new technical assignment approved on November 23, 1933. It provided for the creation of a 4-engine multi-purpose seaplane with a flight range of 1,400 nautical miles and a service ceiling of 15,000 feet. The armament was to consist of bombs of various purposes, as well as 4 defensive installations with machine guns of 7.69 mm caliber. It was also required to provide for the replacement of machine guns in the nose installation with a 37 mm cannon. 5 aircraft manufacturing firms presented their proposals for this technical assignment. The greatest activity was shown by the Supermarine Company, which proposed 3 projects at once. Monoplanes Model 232 and Model 239 with Rolls-Royce Goshawk and Merlin engines, as well as the biplane Model 238 with Bristol Perseus motors. But all these projects, as well as the proposals of the Blackburn and Fairey firms, were rejected. Success accompanied the Saunders Roe and Short Brothers firms. These companies received contracts for the construction of experimental examples of aircraft, according to the proposed projects under the indices A33 and S.25. In November 1936, even before the start of tests, both firms received orders for the first production batches of aircraft of 11 machines each. At that time, the S.25 officially received the name Sunderland in accordance with the British tradition of that time to give large multi-engine combat aircraft names after counties, cities, or provinces of the British Empire. The Saunders Roe flying boat showed unsatisfactory seaworthiness, and besides, it entered testing a year later than the S.25. As a result, the short product, designed under the leadership of Arthur Gouge, turned out to be beyond competition. It is worth noting that the Sunderland was created on the basis of the civil mail and passenger aircraft S-23, named Empire. It was the Empire that was the first English 4-engine flying boat designed according to the scheme of a cantilever monoplane. It had an all-metal construction with smooth duralumin skin. The rather smooth contours of the fuselage were somewhat spoiled by the double step on the bottom. Here, the creators of the machine decided to sacrifice aerodynamics in favor of hydrodynamics, since not only good flight qualities were required from the flying boat, but also high seaworthiness, in particular the ability to take off quickly from the water. The power plant consisted of 4 9-cylinder radial air-cooled Bristol Pegasus 10 motors with a power of 920 horsepower each. The Empire cabin was designed for the installation of 24 passenger seats or 16 sleeping places, as flights sometimes lasted over 10 hours. The cargo compartment held up to 3,000 pounds of luggage and mail. In modern times, no one is surprised by a 30 or even 40-year service life of military aircraft, and some of them, such as the B-52 Stratofortress or C-130 Hercules, have crossed the half-century mark. But in the 1930s and 40s of the 20th century, the process of generational change of aviation equipment went at a much faster pace, and quite often the life path of one or another model was only a few years. Only a few, undoubtedly outstanding machines were able to gain a foothold in the ranks of aviation for a long time, writing their name in golden letters in the book of military history. Among them is the flying boat Short Sunderland, which entered service with the British Royal Air Force on the eve of the Second World War and was withdrawn from service only at the end of the 1950s. The aircraft turned out to be very successful, and the English airline Imperial Airways ordered 28 such machines after testing the prototype. Each of them, like a ship, had its own name, mostly after the names of stars and constellations. The first production Empire, christened Canopus, entered flight tests in July 1936, and in November it began to make regular flights with passengers and mail. Each new machine left the assembly shop at intervals of 2 weeks. At the end of the 1930s, Empire aircraft were actively used on various international airlines. They flew to Australia, Bermuda, Egypt, Malaysia, New York, as well as to East and South Africa. The successful operating experience of these machines prompted Imperial Airways to purchase another 14 flying boats. Thus, by 1940, 42 Empire aircraft had been produced. During the Second World War, they, like most other English passenger aircraft, were requisitioned for military needs. Most Empire machines were used as transports, but 2 aircraft were converted into the anti-submarine variant S.25, installing on them racks for 6 depth charges, anti-ship radars ASV, and 2 4-gun turrets Fraser-Nash for self-defense. However, let us return to the main subject. The experimental Sunderland model was launched on the water on October 14, 1937, and 2 days later it took to the air for the first time under the control of the chief pilot of the Short Brothers firm, John L. Parker. The aircraft was fitted with air-cooled Bristol Pegasus 10 engines, the same as on the Empire. Armament was currently absent, although the aircraft had nose and tail turrets. By the end of October, the prototype made 3 more test flights, after which it was returned to the factory to install new Pegasus 22 engines with a power of 1010 horsepower each. In addition, the wing design was slightly changed, giving it a sweep of 4.5 degrees. This proved necessary since the installation of the rear 4-gun turret, significantly heavier than the single-gun one originally provided for by the project, noticeably shifted the aircraft's center of gravity aft. The re-equipment took several months. Flight tests resumed on March 7, 1938, and proceeded quite successfully, which allowed the machine to be handed over for state tests to the Marine Aircraft Experimental Establishment in the city of Felixstowe as early as April 8. Meanwhile, the order for the production batch of Saunders Roe A-33 flying boats was cancelled, and the initial series of short aircraft was built in parallel with the prototype tests. On April 21st, the first production Sunderland took to the air. Soon it, together with the second production example, joined the tests in Felixstowe. By November, the test cycle was completed, which allowed a conclusion to be drawn about the Sunderland's full compliance with tactical and technical requirements. The flying boat had all the necessary qualities of a maritime patrol aircraft. From the passenger prototype, it inherited a spacious, double-deck fuselage, thanks to which a long flight range was combined with good living conditions. At the crew's disposal was a galley, a dining room, and a bedroom with 6 beds, which gave military pilots unaccustomed to such a level of comfort a reason to nickname the aircraft a flying hotel. The layout of the cockpit, including the location of control instruments and controls in it, was regarded by pilots as ideal. The long flight duration and good maneuverability for such a large machine, combined with good visibility, made the Sunderland an excellent patrol and anti-submarine aircraft. The first production modification, Sunderland Mark I, generally corresponded to the prototype, although it was built according to a refined specification. The armament of production aircraft consisted of 7 machine guns of .303-inch caliber. 5 of them were located in fully rotating glazed Fraser-Nash turrets with hydraulic drive. 1 Vickers machine gun with a disc magazine was mounted in the front turret of the FN-11 type, and 4 Brownings with belt feed in the rear FN-13. By the way, the Sunderland became the first flying boat in the world to receive such gun installations. Previously, gunners had to be content with simple turrets with manual drive. 2 more Vickers K were mounted on pivot installations in semi-open blisters on the fuselage roof behind the wing. Already during production, the single Vickers in the nose turret was replaced by a pair of much more effective Brownings. The aircraft had another original feature. The front gun turret could slide back along rails inside the fuselage. At the same time, something like a small deck with a railing was formed in the nose of the boat, from which it was convenient to carry out mooring. The size of the Sunderland's bomb load turned out to be quite modest, considering the substantial dimensions and takeoff weight of the machine. The fuselage bomb bay accommodated only 2,000 pounds of bombs, in order not to violate the tightness and strength of the boat's bottom with cutouts for bomb bay doors. The designers applied a unique solution. Munitions were extended using an electric drive on special racks through hatches in the sides of the fuselage under the wing, and then dropped, after which the racks were retracted back. The nomenclature of munitions included 500-pound high-explosive aerial bombs, as well as depth charges of 2 calibers, 100-pound and 250-pound. It is worth noting that English depth charges of pre-war design demonstrated very low effectiveness against German submarines. The situation was rectified only with the adoption in early 1943 of 250-pound depth charges, Mark 8, filled with Torpex explosive, more powerful than TNT. The standard crew of the Sunderland Mark I consisted of 7 people: 2 pilots, a navigator, a radio operator, a flight engineer, a bombardier who also operated the nose turret, and a tail turret gunner. But the volume of the fuselage allowed accommodating a relief crew without difficulty. The engines remained the same as on the prototype, Pegasus 22. In total, 89 Sunderlands of the first modification were built, excluding the prototype. 74 of them were produced by the Short factory in Rochester, and another 15, ordered after the start of the war, were built by the Blackburn firm at the factory in Dumbarton. The first of the Sunderlands built in Dumbarton was converted into a prototype of the Mark II modification. This variant differed by slightly more powerful Pegasus 18 engines with 1065 horsepower with 2-speed superchargers. The FN-13 tail turret was replaced by the more successful FN-4A. Like the previous model, this installation had 4 machine guns of .303 caliber, but the ammunition load was doubled to 1,000 rounds per barrel. Shortly after the start of production, an FN-7 turret with a pair of Browning machine guns of .303 caliber was installed on top of the fuselage behind the wing, eliminating the blister installations. Most Sunderlands of the second modification received anti-ship radars, ASV Mark II, with the help of which the crew searched for submarines that surfaced to ventilate compartments and recharge batteries. This station, operating in the 5 feet range, decorated the aircraft with a whole forest of antennas, including 4 transmitting antennas on the fuselage roof in front of the fin, 2 rows of receiving antennas on each side of the fuselage, a total of 16 antennas, and 2 Yagi 1 dipole antennas under the wing consoles. For the characteristic appearance, German pilots nicknamed such Sunderlands Flying Porcupines. Serial production of the Sunderland Mark II began in August 1941. By December, 38 such aircraft were built in Rochester. Another 5 machines were produced by the new Short and Harland factory in Belfast, a joint venture of the Short firm and the shipbuilding concern Harland and Wolff. Here Sunderland production began much later in April 1942. The next modification, Sunderland Mark III, differed from its predecessors by altered fuselage contours. The pronounced steps disappeared from the bottom, replaced by smooth curves. Thanks to this, it was possible to improve the aerodynamic characteristics of the aircraft, but the seaworthiness became noticeably worse. As pilots noted, the new Sunderland became more of an airplane than a boat. But what can you do? Combining the incongruous turned out to be a very difficult task. The Mark III prototype was converted from a standard Sunderland of the first modification. Its tests began on June 28, 1941, and already on December 15, the first production Mark III took to the air. This modification of the Sunderland became the most numerous. 461 such aircraft were built, of which 170 at the Blackburn firm, 71 at the Short and Harland factory, 185 at the main enterprise of the Short firm in Rochester, and another 35 at the new factory of the same firm near Lake Windermere. During production, the onboard equipment of the Sunderland was gradually improved. The first series of Mark III, like the previous modification, were equipped with ASV Mark II radars. But soon after the Germans got an almost undamaged sample of ASV Mark II, removed from an English Hudson aircraft that crashed in Tunisia, German submarines received an effective countermeasure, the anti-radar FUMB-1 METOX, nicknamed the Biscay Cross, for the characteristic shape of the antenna. This device detected the radiation of British radars at distances of up to 37 miles, allowing the boat to dive before the Hunter aircraft appeared above it. Therefore, subsequently, Sunderlands received ASV Mark III radars of the centimeter range, developed on the basis of the bomber radar H2S. The radiation of this station was not detected by METOX. Much more compact antenna devices of ASV Mark III were located in 2 underwing fairings. The modification with this type of radar, designated Sunderland Mark IIIA, appeared in early 1943. The weak point of all Mark III models was the low power and not very reliable power plant, as used motors that had already served their term on bombers were often installed on them. New Pegasuses were not enough for Sunderlands. Therefore, the main difference of the last production variant of the flying boat Mark V became American 14-cylinder twin-row engines, Pratt & Whitney R1830-90B twin Wasp, with a power of 1,200 horsepower each. However, the increase in the aircraft's power-to-weight ratio did not lead to a significant improvement in flight characteristics, and this was not the main goal of modernization. Much more important was the increase in survivability. The fifth model gained the ability to fly without losing altitude, even with two inoperative engines on one wing. As prototypes, according to established tradition, two Sunderland Mark IIIs were used. After re-equipment, these aircraft entered tests, respectively, in March and May 1944, and serial production of the Mark V began at the end of the same year. Production fives differed from prototypes by new radars, ASV Mark IV. In addition, due to the reduced likelihood of encountering an air enemy, upper turrets were often not installed on aircraft, but armament in the nose part was significantly strengthened by installing 4 fixed-course machine guns of .303-inch caliber in addition to the turret. Of course, the Sunderland did not become an attack aircraft from this, but now it could, in addition to bombs, strafe the submarine attacked by it with machine gun fire. Production of the Mark V continued in Rochester until September 1945, in Dumbarton until November, and in Belfast until June 1946. In total, 154 aircraft of this modification were built, 47 each in Rochester and Belfast and 60 in Dumbarton. Orders for another 93 examples were cancelled after the end of the war, and in Belfast several unfinished Sunderlands were simply drowned in the sea, which is quite strange, since aviation duralumin is not cheap. In addition to the newly built ones, 88 fives were made by converting Sunderland Mark IIIs. This was done by the factory on Lake Windermere. The first combat unit to receive the Sunderland Mark I was 210 Squadron stationed at Pembroke Dock, which began rearmament in June 1938. But the priority was initially enjoyed by the Far East region, so the first unit fully rearmed with aircraft of this modification was 230 Squadron in Salida. In addition, Sunderland Mark I armed 204 and 228 squadrons. In total, as of September 1, 1939, 40 Sunderland aircraft were listed in the units of the Coastal Command. The authorized strength of a squadron with aircraft of this type was 9 machines. It seemed that the matter would end there, as the firm Saunders Roe tried to take revenge by offering the RAF the twin-engine flying boat Lerwick. It was this aircraft that was considered more promising in 1940, but eventually its numerous shortcomings revealed during operation gave a second chance to the Sunderland. In the autumn of 1941, deliveries of the Mark II modification began, and at the very beginning of 1942 Mark III, the war for the Sunderland began on September 3, 1939, when crews of 210 Squadron went on the first patrol flight. It was these aircraft that carried out the first air-sea rescue operation in the Second World War, which took place on September 21st. On that day, 2 Sunderlands took on board 34 crew members of the transport Kensington Court, torpedoed by a German submarine in the North Sea. In the spring of 1940, 204, 210, and 228 Sunderland squadrons, which were in the metropolis, were redeployed to the forward bases of Sullom Voe and Invergordon to participate in the Norwegian campaign. Sunderlands carried out reconnaissance and transport missions. In these operations, the crew of one of the aircraft distinguished itself, which on April 3, 1940 was able to shoot down 2 Junkers Ju-88s. After the loss of Norway and the defeat of France, the western approaches to the British Isles became the main theater of hostilities for flying boats. During the Battle of the Atlantic, these waters were patrolled by Sunderlands from the bases of Mountbatten, Pembroke Dock, Stranraer, Lough Erne, Oban, Bowmore, Poole, and Sullom Voe. Later, these flying boats appeared in Reykjavik and Gibraltar. Significant expansion of combat application areas required the formation of new units. The first squadron to receive Sunderlands after the start of the war was 10 Australian Squadron. Initially, it was planned to send it to Australia after retraining, but in the end, it remained in the metropolis, flying from the Mountbatten base until disbandment in October 1945. At the beginning of 1940, 201 Squadron was armed with new aircraft, and later 95 Squadron. In June 1940, 228 Squadron from the metropolis and 230 from the Far East were transferred to Alexandria to cover communications between Gibraltar and Suez, which were under threat due to Italy's entry into the war. A brilliant debut for the Sunderland in the Mediterranean theater of operations was the actions of one of the crews, which on June 30, 1940 sent to the bottom 2 Italian submarines at once, Argonauta and Rubino. The remoteness of the base in Alexandria from the main patrol areas forced the use of forward hydro aerodromes for Sunderlands. In particular, aircraft of 228 Squadron were based on a rotational basis in Malta and 230 in Scaramangas, Greece. It was a 228 Squadron aircraft that took off from Malta that discovered the Italian fleet at sea, marking the beginning of the victorious Battle of Matapan for the British. A few months later, a Sunderland carried out reconnaissance of the Italian naval base of Taranto before the famous raid by British carrier aviation on November 11, 1940. By chance, 4-engine hydroplanes sometimes had to act in the role of fighters. Thus, on September 17, 1940, one of the aircraft of 228 Squadron shot down an Italian flying boat, Cant Z501. The 3rd Air Unit using Sunderlands in the Mediterranean theater of operations was 202 Squadron, based in Gibraltar. Its most notable success was the destruction of the Italian submarine Alabastro on September 14, 1942. In April and May 1941, the main task of the Mediterranean Sunderlands became passenger flights, evacuation of British and Greek troops, first from continental Greece and later from Crete. In most cases, flying boats had to operate with an overload. In a record flight on April 25, 1941, an aircraft under the control of Flight Lieutenant Lamond took out 82 people from the Bay of Kalamata, plus 10 crew members. Another Sunderland took the Greek royal family to Alexandria. The importance of the Sunderland in these operations is illustrated by the following figures. Out of 28,000 British people evacuated from Crete, 14,500 were taken out by precisely these flying boats. The increase in the number of Sunderlands in service necessitated the creation of a specialized training unit for them. It became 4 Training Squadron, organized in March 1941 on the basis of the Hydro Aviation School in Biscay. Running ahead, we note that this unit, reorganized in July 1947 into 235 Operational Conversion Unit, operated Sunderlands until 1953. In 1941, Sunderlands began patrolling over the Central and South Atlantic. Initially, 204 and 95 Squadrons transferred from the metropolis operated here. Soon they were joined by 270 Squadron, as well as allied units, 343 Squadron of Free France and 490 New Zealand Squadron. The aircraft used hydro aerodromes in Apapa, Bathurst, and Freetown. A certain danger for flying boats was posed by fighters of the French collaborationist Vichy regime. Vichy Mohawks stationed in Senegal in September 1941 several times tried to intercept Sunderlands, but success was not on the side of the hunters. On September 29, 1941, the crew of a flying boat demonstrated the power of its defensive armament, shooting down 2 of the 4 fighters attempting to attack it. When Senegal came under the control of the Gaullists, Dakar became the new base for Sunderlands. It was in this region that a peculiar record for the Sunderland was set during takeoff in the open sea. One of the aircraft took on board 56 crew members of a sunken transport, and the takeoff run of the heavily overloaded flying boat was 5 miles. Note that according to instructions, the Sunderland was not supposed to land and take off in the open sea at all, but only in closed water areas. In 1942, the Coastal Command rearmed another 5 squadrons with Sunderlands, 119 and 246 British, 422 and 423 Canadian, as well as 461 Australian. Despite the wide range of tasks, the main one for the Sunderland remained the fight against German U-boats. The first successful attack on a submarine was carried out by a Sunderland on January 30, 1940, when an aircraft from 228 Squadron damaged the boat U-55 in the English Channel, which had already been attacked by British and French surface ships and forced to surface. As a result, the submarine ran aground. On July 1, 1940, the Australian 10 Squadron recorded the first submarine on its account. Boat U-26, which had received damage the day before from depth charges of the sloop Gladiolus, was discovered in a surface position off the southwest coast of Ireland by a Sunderland crew under the command of Flight Lieutenant Gibson. 4 500-pound bombs proved enough to force the crew to abandon the sinking submarine. Over the next 3 years, Sunderland stationed in the metropolis detected and attacked the underwater enemy many times. Just one 10 squadron during April 1942 conducted 8 attacks on German submarines. However, cases of successful bombings leading to the destruction or serious damage of boats were relatively rare. Nevertheless, the effectiveness of Sunderland actions was considered high, because the detection and bombing of a U-boat almost certainly led to the disruption of its attack on the convoy being protected. The appearance in 1943 of a more effective anti-submarine radar, ASV Mark III, allowed anti-submarine aircraft to move from escorting convoys to offensive tactics, trying to intercept the enemy on the way to his hunting areas. The main patrol area for Sunderland's became the Bay of Biscay, where the routes of German submarines based in the ports of the French Atlantic coast passed. Here, the Australians distinguished themselves again, opening the score of Sunderland victories in this water area. On May 2, 1943, the crew of 461 Squadron sent U-465 to the bottom, and on May 8, the crew of 10 Squadron achieved success, the victim of which became the boat U-663. In total, by the end of 1943, Sunderland sank 6 U-boats in the Bay of Biscay, 5 of them independently and 1 in cooperation with Halifax bombers. They sent another 6 submarines to the bottom in other areas of the Atlantic. But the Bay of Biscay was within reach of Luftwaffe heavy fighters, which forced Sunderland crews to repeatedly engage in air battles. It is worth saying that flying boats turned out to be a tough nut to crack for the enemy. For example, on June 2, 1943, a group of 8 Junkers Ju-88Cs attacked a Sunderland Mark III from 10 Squadron. During the battle, the flying boat received many damages. The radio station was put out of action, most of the 11 crew members were wounded, and one of the gunners died. But as a result, 3 Junkers were shot down, 3 others damaged, and the Sunderland managed to limp to the coast of Cornwall. A dozen boats were sunk by Sunderland crews in 1944, 10 of them independently, another 2 in cooperation with surface ships. As before, the main hunting area was the Bay of Biscay, where English naval pilots sent 7 submarines to the bottom. Especially successful was the day of June 7th, when crews of 2R1 and 228 squadrons sank 2 U-boats at once, U-955 and U-970. The hunting season was closed by 2R1 Squadron. On December 6, 1944, its crew sank the submarine U-297 near the Orkney Islands. In February 1945, deliveries of Sunderland Mark V to combat units began. The first to receive new aircraft were 228 and 461 squadrons, but the end of the war in Europe did not allow them to fully demonstrate their capabilities. In the last months of the war, new Sunderlands did not sink a single submarine. In total, seaplanes of this type destroyed 26 German U-boats, 21 of them independently. The most successful turned out to be 10 Squadron, which recorded 7 submarines on its account. 5 boats were sunk by crews of 201 Squadron, 4 each by 228 and 461. Another boat was sunk jointly by crews of these 2 squadrons. 3 boats are on the account of Canadian crews from 423 and 402 squadrons. 1 submarine was sunk jointly with surface ships by a Sunderland from 330 Norwegian squadron. Finally, even 4 training squadron recorded 1 victory on its account. After the end of the Second World War, most Sunderland squadrons were disbanded. By the end of 1946, the Coastal Command in the metropolis operated these flying boats in only 3 units, 201, 230, and 4 Operational Conversion Unit based in Calshot. Another 3 squadrons were part of the Far East Air Force. In particular, 205 Squadron was based in Kogala in Ceylon, 209 in Seletar, Singapore, and the newly formed 88 Squadron in Hong Kong. The reduction of the aircraft fleet led to its unification. Only machines of the last modification Mark V remained in service with the Royal Air Force. Later, the designation was changed to GR Mark V and eventually to MR Mark V. The first post-war operation in which Sunderlands distinguished themselves was the so-called Berlin Airlift. Starting from July 5, 1948, seaplanes of 211 and 230 squadrons relocated to Hamburg transported food to West Berlin blocked by Soviet troops, landing on Lake Havelsee. By December 15th, when the lake was finally fettered by ice, Sunderlands had transported over 4,900 tons of cargo to Berlin. On return flights, flying boats evacuated 1,100 children from Berlin and also carried commercial cargo products of Berlin enterprises. From June 1948, seaplanes of 205 and 209 squadrons were involved in anti-insurgency operations in Malaya. Initially, these machines were used as bombers, carrying in a typical variant 112 20-pound fragmentation bombs. Bombing was carried out from medium altitudes from 6,500 to 8,200 feet, and fuses ensured an explosion at a height of 50 to 65 feet above the ground, increasing the radius of destruction. After the arrival of Lincoln bombers in Malaysia, crews of 205 and 209 squadrons switched to patrolling coastal waters, trying to intercept watercraft supplying the partisans. On April 21, 1949, the Hong Kong 88 Squadron distinguished itself. On this day, the British frigate Amethyst, damaged by artillery fire from Chinese communists. It is worth recalling that a civil war was going on in China at that time, in which the USA and Great Britain supported anti-communist forces, ran aground on the Yangtze River. 2 Sunderlands under fire delivered a doctor, an emergency team, and necessary spare parts to the Amethyst, thanks to which the ship and crew were saved. Shortly after this, flying boats of 88 Squadron were involved in the evacuation of British subjects from Shanghai, which was about to be captured by communists. All 3 squadrons of Sunderland aircraft of the Far East Air Force 88, 205, and 209 participated in the war in Korea, becoming the only units of the British Royal Air Force involved in this conflict. On a rotational basis, flights of these squadrons were seconded to Japan, to the Atsugi Air Base. From there, Sunderlands provided search and rescue operations, flying day and night in any weather. On January 1, 1955, 205 and 209 squadrons were combined into a new unit, the WWII 209 Squadron. Meanwhile, 201 and 230 squadrons based in the metropolis were engaged in more peaceful affairs, for example, supporting the British North Greenland expedition, which worked on the island from July 1951 to August 1954. The last Sunderland squadron stationed directly in Great Britain, 230, was disbanded on July 31, 1957. The Far Eastern 205-209 Squadron served a little longer. Its seaplanes made their last flight on May 20, 1959, closing the 21-year chronicle of the history of Sunderland service in the Royal Air Force. As already noted, a whole range of foreign squadrons that were part of the Royal Air Force fought on Sunderlands. The first foreign operator was New Zealand, which received 4 Sunderland Mark IIIs in December 1944. Flying boats were ideally suited for supplying remote Pacific islands, so in 1952 the government of this country purchased another 16 Sunderland MR Mark Vs. The aircraft entered service with 5 and 6 squadrons, where they were used for 15 years. The last official flight of a New Zealand Sunderland of 5 Squadron took place on April 2, 1967. They were replaced by Orions. In February 1945, 262 RAF Squadron flying Catalinas was included in the South African Air Force. There, the unit changed its number to 35, and already in April, the squadron was transferred 16 Sunderland Mark Vs instead of Catalinas. One machine crashed during the flight to South Africa, while others served until 1955, when most of them were written off for scrap. Only one aircraft continued to fly until the end of 1957. The French manned 343 Sunderland Squadron in November 1945 was transferred together with the aircraft to the French Naval Aviation Aéronavale, where it received the name Flotilla 7FE, later renamed to 7F and then to 27F. This unit was based in Dakar. In 1947-1957, Aéronavale received another 25 Sunderlands, staffing squadrons 12S, 50S, and 53S with them. From 1960, these seaplanes began to be withdrawn from operation. The last 2 Sunderlands served in French naval aviation until January 30, 1962. The first civil owner of demobilized Sunderlands was the famous airline WWII. This firm, which carried out transportation in the interests of the British military department during the Second World War, received 6 brand new flying boats of the Mark III modification on lease in December 1942. Armament was removed from the aircraft, passenger cabins and luggage compartments were equipped. And already on December 26, the first commercial Sunderland flight took place. Spacious flying boats with a long flight duration were best suited for servicing long routes connecting the metropolis with West Africa. So in the summer of 1943, the airline's fleet was replenished with another 6 converted Mark IIIs. BOAC received the next 2 batches of such seaplanes in 1944, thus bringing the total number of its Sunderlands to 24. In the same year, the operation of these flying boats began on the Indian airline connecting the metropolis via Cairo with Karachi and further with Calcutta. One of the Sunderlands, previously converted into a VIP variant, delivered the new Viceroy of India, Lord Wavell, to his place of service in May 1944, taking his predecessor, Lord Linlithgow, back to the metropolis on the return flight. In the war years, 2 civil Sunderlands crashed in air disasters, while others continued to be operated in BOAC even after the war. The aircraft underwent major repairs, after which they were assigned a new name, Hythe. Such machines had a comfortable double-deck cabin for 24 passengers with a buffet, as well as a cargo compartment for 6,600 pounds of cargo. One of the machines underwent deep reconstruction, receiving a modified nose part. The seaplane with civil registration DAGKX, which received the name Sandringham 1, became a model for many subsequent conversions with the same name but different serial numbers. Already at the end of 1945, 5 machines of modifications, Sandringham 2 and Sandringham 3, were sold to Argentina. The New Zealand airline Tasman Empire Airways received a quartet of Sandringham 4s. BOAC also updated its fleet, leasing 9 examples of Sandringham 5 in 1947, and the following year, another 3 aircraft of the 7th modification. 5 Sandringham 6 flying boats were owned by the Norwegian airline DNL. Regular Sunderlands without a modified nose part were also operated by various air carriers. 2 such Sunderland Mark Vs were sold to an Argentine airline, another such aircraft, and 2 Mark III models to a Uruguayan one. Several Sunderlands were purchased by Australian Airlines. BOAC, which received, in addition to Hythe and Sandringham, also Solent, the civil variant of Seaford, operated them on lines connecting Britain with South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Japan, India, and Pakistan. Together with military Sunderlands, Hythe models also participated in the Berlin airlift, but gradually they were displaced by faster passenger aircraft of the new generation with wheeled landing gear. On November 10, 1950, BOAC officially ceased the operation of flying boats on regular lines. 10 of its Hythes, several Solents, and the very first Sandringham were bought by the British airline Aquila Airways, which used these seaplanes for another few years. The last Sandringham 1 was written off in 1956. Civil Sunderlands served much longer in other countries. For example, in Argentina, they carried passengers and mail until 1967. The record belongs to one former Australian seaplane which was operated in French Polynesia as late as 1970.